All right, Mr. Rebound, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing well. I was doing well, and I came across this article, and I'm doing slightly less well. I'd like to discuss this with you, if that's okay.
Yeah, I'd love to discuss this.
So there's this Substack that was written by someone named Andrew Gold, who is a podcaster. And full disclosure, I know this person personally. They've been on the Babylon podcast before a handful of times. Legitimately nice guy. I don't think he's a grifter by any stretch of the imagination. I think he's genuine. I just think he's misguided on this article and on his views as of late. And I'd like to discuss this Substack that he wrote, because one of the things that I've discussed with you, and I guess one of my political theories, if you even want to call it that, is the informational pendulum, where it's usually the side that is winning that tends to get lazy and tends to get complacent in where they're at, so much so to the point where they start to become the side that's more uninformed than the other side. And it's the side that's losing that, because they're losing, because they feel they need to put in a little bit more legwork, they usually come off as more well-informed. And so, for example, in 2015, I would have made the argument that the side that was more well-informed in terms of what's going on in society would have probably been the conservative side. As of late, probably starting around 2020, 2021 or so, the pendulum started swinging in the other direction, where the Republicans were making so much headway into the government, and also just they started gaining a lot more cultural capital, specifically with their new ecosystem, their informational ecosystem that they have on platforms like YouTube, the Joe Rogans of the world, the Brett Weinsteins of the world, the Tim Pools of the world, the Ben Shapiro's of the world. They have this informational ecosystem that the other side doesn't. And so they've made tremendous headway, not only within the government, but also just within culture itself. And so because of that, it seems like the pendulum swung in the other direction, and now the side that tends to be pretty uninformed tends to be the conservatives, or specifically the anti-woke side of the cultural conversation. And I think this Substack article here is a pretty good example of that, where and I don't want to get too deep into it, but there are things that he says in here, and I'll bring them up when we come across them, that screams of him not updating his views and him not being up to date in terms of what's going on. So anyways, that's the type of article this is the type of article that I would like to discuss, and I think this is Andrew Gold's Substack here would be a good leaping off point. So are you excited for this?
Yeah, I'm excited. I mean, I guess for disclosure, we've both read this before, so this isn't our first run through. But yeah.
All right, so let's get started. So the title of the article is called "Why I'm Off the Fence About Trump" by Andrew Gold. It's a quick read, so hopefully we won't be here too long. We'll see about that. But it starts off, "I am a liberal. At least I think I am. If this were the 90s, liberals might herald me as an archetype. Today, liberals think I'm like an actual bookshops and festivals disinvite me from speaking about my book, The Psychology of Secrets. I actually didn't even know he was coming out with a book. TV execs no longer welcome my documentaries. Theaters won't even allow me to do live events on their stages. Even this past week, several audio production companies rejected me, despite my podcast getting big numbers, because I'm the term they use is misaligned values."
So yeah, already over here, he even says it himself, so maybe he gets points for that transparency, but at the same time, he's essentially just projecting misaligned values onto him being called an
This was one of the big talking points in 2015 and 2016, where you would point at a lot of people who would find injustices everywhere, even where there are none, and they would throw around names needlessly. And this was a big problem, I think, in 2015. 2016, I don't think this is that big of an issue now, especially if I would argue that per capita, the amount of people throwing around the insult of this person's a socialist, this person is a communist, that tends to happen a lot more often than people saying this person is an... It just doesn't happen really that much anymore. And even if it did, it's not that big of a deal because these people have no political sway. They don't vote. If there's anything that we learned with this recent election, is that they're not politically active in the way that we would expect them to be. They don't vote, and because they don't vote, if anything, they're actually helping Donald Trump. So I would argue that if the concern is avoiding arguments and resorting to ad hominem attacks, the conservatives have absolutely taken this. The amount of conservatives that throw around the term socialist, that throw around the term communist, is much higher than the amount of people on the left who throw around the word. And the reason why I was saying at the beginning where this article feels like it's very outdated or like it should have been published in 2015 is because I don't think this is a problem anymore. I think because the pendulum has swung in the other direction, it's not that big of a deal. Even if it did happen, even if it's happening as often as he says it's happening, a big difference is that he's incredibly popular. I think he has around 500,000 subscribers right now or something like that. So almost by definition, he's going to get a large group of people that are going to be calling him certain things, not because it's happening just rampantly, but just by sheer numbers. And also the thing that he says right here, where he says that he was rejected by several audio production companies, despite his podcast getting big numbers, because he's saying that the reason is because they think he's but according to them, as stated by him, the term that they are using is misaligned values, which I think is perfectly justifiable. I've already expressed my belief that deplatforming certain political opinions, specifically, I should say these, the anti-wokes, right? Deplatforming them because you think that they're not or whatever it may be. I don't think that's conducive to a functioning civilized society. I think civilization is built on conversation, and we need those types of conversations. However, because these are private companies, at the end of the day, if they choose to platform certain people, and they can, if they choose not to, they can as well. But it's a lot more justifiable, and it's a lot more understandable to refuse to invite someone onto your platform because they have different values than you do, rather than just saying, well, they're... So I think, like, this is one of those instances in which what he's saying is that they didn't invite me because I'm and immediately you're like, dang, that's crazy. I'm sorry that happened. That sucks. But then if you actually listen to what the other people say, the other people said, well, we didn't call them we just said that we have misaligned values. Then you're kind of like, oh, I feel like the other person lied to me a little bit because the issue is not as severe as he made it out to be. He's making the situation appear a lot worse than it actually is.
And I guess ironically, for using the term, a lot of Trump's own former administration have actually used those terms. I think like John Kelly and J.D. Vance, his own current vice president, both of them have essentially called or likened him to Hitler before, which is like that. That's his own party. That's not the Democratic Party, tossing those labels around. That's his own people.
I do want to mention this, though, because he goes on to list a plethora of things that possibly most Trump supporters are against, such as being pro-choice, pro-gay marriage, and pro-vax. These are not small things. These things are bigger than the perceived differences that he has with leftists. Knowing him, he's largely focused on the trans issue. Now, statistically, these things that he listed are
fundamentally against like voting for Republicans.
These are not small things, and I don't like that he's saying it just kind of as an offhand remark, like, hey, I'm pro-choice, I'm pro-gay, pro-gay marriage, I'm pro-vax. I know a lot of my fellow people who are supporting Trump disagree with me on this. That, like, why don't you can just as easily say, like, hey, I'm voting for Kamala Harris, and I do support some things that a lot of people on my side of the aisle don't support. So, for example, I think the separation of the sexes within sports is incredibly important. Like, that statement right there that I just made is a lot less crazy than the statement that he said. He's saying that I'm atheist, pro-choice, pro-gay marriage, and pro-vax, even though I understand a lot of people, maybe more than we expect, don't support these things. Like, that's a bigger concern than whatever it is you're going to point towards on the other end.
And that's not to say that, like, you have to wholeheartedly agree with your side, and it's like, oh, look, you're pro-gay, well, then you can't vote for Republicans. That's not what we're saying over here, right? But, like, as you said, as you pointed out, the things he's critiquing the other side for are random people, not even, like, within the party, but just, like, broadly people who probably don't even vote, who are calling him names, right? Something they're also guilty of. While you actually have party leaders on the other side, an actual policy, right, going against everything that he's saying, right? Almost every single point that he says there is probably actually, like, being somewhat challenged by actual policy, right? When he talks about like atheism, when there's actual there's a lot of actions being taken in the education system to violate the Establishment Clause, right? When he talks about pro-choice, the Roe v. Wade gets stricken down, and you probably actually have plenty of states who are also imposing abortion bans. Pro-gay, you actually have Congress members who are willing to actually push forward legislation to backroll gay marriage. And then also the pro-vax one, which, again, as you mentioned, you have RFK in charge of the Health and Human Services, and then you also have two other anti-vaxxers being put in charge of very important health roles. Like, everything that he's mentioning as, like, oh yeah, I agree with you guys on these things. So you agree with, like, the Democrats on almost everything, like, policy based that looks like it's going to be challenged. But then the critiques that you point out about the Democrats aren't even things that Democratic leaders are saying to you.
Anyway, I can't describe myself as MAGA and won't be wearing a red cap. I find nostalgic pining for a country's greatness leads to unreliable recollections. Was America really great when it kept slaves or when it deprived black people of civil rights? I accept that we must view a country within the context of its time, and so America was perhaps great relative to other nations. I would agree with this, but we now inhabit a different time. I want to look forward, not to the past. Trump is brash and unstatesmanlike. He has baggage, and despite speaking against the establishment, he is very much of it. He gloats, he exaggerates. It's not very British to confess admiration for Trump. Despite this, I find him funny and charismatic. I fell over laughing at his stand-up routine about straws to the backdrop of Seinfeld music. His rudeness and sense of humor are a perfect antidote to the humorless Greg Blob of woke authoritarianism. These may seem like superficial elements, but the lack of humor in leftism is a feature, not a bug.
He's already starting off with maybe he's just starting off with something soft, maybe he's just starting off with, like, oh well, this guy's more charismatic. But I really do hope that he does eventually get into policy and doesn't just stick to the charisma. Right, because especially with all the things that he mentioned, right? He even said, unlike other Trumpsters, right? He mentioned anti-gay, anti-pro-choice, anti-this. So he recognizes that those are very common features within Trump's administration and within Trump's voters, right? So we're right now. It seems like, right, if he continues this way and doesn't actually give policies later on, that what he's comparing is just the charisma versus these actual beliefs.
Yeah, and he's also describing the left as humorless and authoritarian, and the way to combat that is with the humor that Donald Trump has. The problem here is a definition problem. What do you mean by leftist? One of the big issues that I've had in the past couple of years is that people throw around a term like leftist, throw around a term like woke, without really defining what it means. Because you can have someone like Ben Shapiro, he can give you his definition of what it means to be woke, and then you can have someone like John McWhorter, he can give you his definition of what it means to be woke. And while there might be some noticeable overlap to the point where you can at least agree on certain aspects of this group of people that you dislike, and I probably would also agree as well, the problem is that there are so many factors within this group of people that someone like Ben Shapiro would consider woke, that someone like John McWhorter would not, someone like Sam Harris would not. And this fracturing has continued to occur, and it's gotten greater and greater and greater, so much so to the point where it really doesn't take a lot of effort to find a tweet that shows a picture of a gay couple and calling that woke, or a video game coming out with a black main protagonist and calling that woke just by virtue of there being a black protagonist in the video game. it's almost lost all its meaning, in the same way that you would argue that the term racist has lost all meaning because it's been thrown around so easily without much substance behind the term. You can say the same exact thing about the term woke. And so when I read something like this, someone says the leftists, the woke people, or whatever it may be, I don't know what group of people you're referring to, but I do know what side you're standing on, because a lot of people, and this is a big problem that we've been having, is that people prefer to identify politically as what they're opposed to rather than what they stand for. And that's kind of what the anti-woke community is basically at this point. They're just annoyed with the other side. They hate the other side, but they're not really introspective. So if you were to ask someone who's anti-woke, what issues do you have with the Democrats? What issues do you have with the left? They would give off a whole, a bullet point list of just a massive, like a lot of things. But then if you were to ask them, well, what issues do you have with the Republicans? Or what issues do the other side think that the Republicans have? They would probably give you like two things, and those two things are like very inaccurate. Because again, these people are not defining themselves politically as what they are, what they stand for, but rather what they hate. And because of that, it creates just this political ecosystem in which it's almost impossible to have a reasonable conversation about, the pros and cons of a certain side, when neither side, as I said earlier at the beginning of this video, when what the Republicans don't really know that much about their own side. They don't really know much about what the arguments from the opposition are, because they don't really look into it, because they're winning. They don't have to. They get lazy. They get complacent.
Yeah, you also have like woke is such a globular term, as you said. I think even in some instances you have just recognition of like climate change as being considered woke. They also they can't separate out they say leftist and they say liberal, and they use all these words sort of interchangeably. But I think even leftists, right, self-proclaimed leftists like to distinguish themselves from liberals, and sometimes even pretty much hate liberals. They'll see liberals as just enablers of the right. So it feels like this sort of framing is just very like unconscious of the political landscape and the actual like distinct groups that exist all across the spectrum.
And as you said, also the fact that he even uses this idea of Trump's humor being an antidote to the humorless woke globs on the left. I mean, one of the big concerns that we have with the Republicans is that they don't they don't know anything about policy. They don't discuss policy. All they do is run on narratives. They just run on these stories that they tell themselves, and they're very attractive and they're very compelling narratives that a lot of people fall for. But in terms of actual policy, in terms of things that will actually affect the everyday person, they don't really have anything to say. Instead of actually giving a detailed analysis of immigration policy, they'll resort to things like the Democrats just want open borders. Just look at the sanctuary cities that they have established. Just look at the fact that they don't care about immigration. Just look at the fact that they want to constantly call illegal aliens just undocumented Americans or whatever it may be. That they just focus on these things instead of actually discussing what they would do to fix the situation. And when they do try to even touch upon the idea of fixing the situation, they'd say something stupid like, well, what about building the wall? It's like, well, the issue with immigration isn't building, it has to do with asylum, right? The asylum process. It wouldn't really do anything. And so they don't tackle actual issues and give substantive answers to it, rather than just kind of give this very broad and narrative-based argument against the other side. Like this, at the end of the day, just kind of means nothing. I don't care if the left is comprised of people who are like the unfunniest people on the planet. That doesn't really matter to me. What matters to me are the actual policies that these people want to implement. I don't care if they're the most boring people on the planet. It doesn't matter to me.
Yeah, because like ultimately, like if you want comedy, go to the comedy club. If you want comedy, go watch comedy videos online. But when you go to the voting booth, that's not a comedy booth, right? It's a freaking voting booth. Vote for who's actually going to give you your rights, and not and not threaten to actually take away the rights that allow us to tell this sort of humor and that allow us to have humor in the first place. One thing you also mentioned was about the narratives and how they're very appealing, right? When they say something like when they mention things like the woke, right? Everyone has sort of their own depiction of what the woke is, but this could very easily grasp people, because each person might have like their own idea of what the woke is, and they're like, yeah, I don't like the woke, especially when you have this sort of depiction of the woke that takes all of the worst caricatures of nut picks, right? Of certain nut picks on the left, and people can take that image and then they can just concentrate on that, and Andrew Gold doesn't have to do any of the heavy lifting. He can just rely on people's own internal depiction of what they imagine that the woke is, to be able to like picture that image, right? And that's just so much easier to do than to actually talk about policy. Right, it's just so much easier to convey and to spread around in people's minds. Right, that's far more of a mind virus than I guess wokeism itself.
And he's also attaching this description to the Democratic Party and Kamala Harris. The Democrats and Kamala Harris are not woke. They didn't run on wokeness. What happened was that the Republicans convinced people that they are woke, that the Democrat is the party of woke. They're the party of billionaires. Things that aren't true, but they just convinced a lot of people to do so. And this perpetuates that. When he says these things, and the whole point of the article is why he's no longer on the fence regarding Trump, and why he would never vote for Kamala Harris, he's saying these things associating Kamala Harris and the Democratic Party with this blob of woke authoritarianism, even though they didn't run on wokeness. They didn't. When Kamala Harris, a couple of days before she was, before November 6th, before November 5th, when Kamala Harris was asked regarding the fact that she was going to be the first black female president and how that's going to matter to a lot of people in the United States, she gave the perfect answer, which was not necessarily a 100% refutal of identity politics, but a very clear cut, this is not what I'm running on. She said, yeah, you can't ignore that, obviously, but I'm not running only for this group of people. I'm running for all Americans. She constantly talked about freedom. She constantly talked about loving this country. Those are things that are not associated with wokeness, because the Democratic Party and Kamala Harris, they learned their lesson from 2016. They're not running on wokeness. They're not doing it. But it doesn't really matter what they do, because when you have a really convincing and really compelling narratives that are coming from the Republicans that are painting these people as something that they're not, and it's working, then it doesn't really matter what the other side is going to do, right? And so this is one of my big problems, is that, one, he's not defining what it means to be on the left or what it means to be a leftist. Again, Kamala Harris, you could just make the argument that she's another boring neoliberal centrist when it comes to actual economic and fiscal policy. But because these people are so convincing and so effective and so popular at just finding these annoying people on TikTok and finding these annoying people on Instagram Reels or whatever it may be, of people who say that there's a million genders or whatever, and all like your typical usual suspects, they'll just say that, they'll point and laugh at that, and then people watching that will say, yeah, that's crazy, and they'll say, well, that's the Democratic Party, and it creates this environment in which people are under the impression that that's what the Democratic Party is, but they're not by any stretch of the imagination. And this is a byproduct of the fact that these people, because they are winning, they don't need to actually do the research. No one actually does the work and looks into whether or not some of the claims that are being made are actually true. If someone makes the claim that the Democratic Party doesn't care about immigration, and you have a bunch of comments under that YouTube video that are agreeing with it, that are making fun of the other side, that are going crazy because the other side doesn't care about immigration, then that's good enough for 99% of the people that are going to come across that video. But very few people are actually going to look into that claim and think, wait, do the Democrats actually not care about immigration? They're not going to look it up and say that, oh, shoot, they actually did try to pass a border bill. And when it was rejected at first because it was kind of like, they were accusing them of just being a secret Ukrainian bill, and they had to reintroduce it, it still fails. Most people are not actually going to look that up because it's just too time consuming. So yeah, and like, this is my big problem with a lot of the way in which these articles are being written, is that they don't substantiate anything. And a lot of the people, the American citizenry, that we hope and we expect that would actually look into a lot of these claims that are being made, they don't. And because they don't, and because they just kind of go off in all like this giant anti-woke community that is very effective and is very powerful. It makes it very, very difficult when you actually care about what's going on in the country. Like, hey, a lot of people are feeling displaced. A lot of people are feeling unhappy with their life situation. Those people are not going to be addressed because people are too busy fighting this proxy war over here that doesn't matter. And so a lot of these people are going to kind of get brushed under the rug. If you actually do care about immigration, if you actually do care about something like that, then I would expect you to be as well informed as possible, to not just believe everything that you read in a Facebook article. You would actually do the work, but they don't, because it's just kind of like politics is a video game at this point to a lot of people. It's a sports game, really. So he goes on. Maybe he'll actually start talking about policy. So he goes, also, before his stint in 2016, Hollywood celebrities did a video about how famous they all were and how Trump would fire nuclear weapons. Well, he didn't. So now what?
Okay, I have to interrupt already. Okay, Hollywood celebrities did a video. Is this what he's using for like as an example? Like, again, like you're comparing Hollywood celebrities. Well, maybe you can say that Hollywood celebrities have a lot of like social influence and all of that. But like that's not the politicians, right? That's a very different thing from the politicians.
And this is 2016 too. This is almost 10 years ago. Why does this matter? I can find crazy stuff that the Republicans said 10 years ago as well. I can find crazy stuff that they said in 2008, but I don't use it.
Even also, it's you're going to something like 10. You're going to something like 8 years ago, when you can just go 4 years ago and find an insurrection. You can find where Trump actually got a bunch of people to forge certificates of ascertainment in order to subvert the actual electoral process. That's an attempted coup, right? You have this president who attempted a coup, right? This is the person who's actually running. This is the person who won the previous election, obviously not the 2021, right? Although if you still ask Republicans, they I think it was like 80% of them still think that he actually won that election. But he actually tried to subvert that election in an illegal way, and the only reason that didn't pass, right? Maybe it could have been struck down later, but Pence himself actually stood in the way of that and decided not to listen to Trump, right? And you have this, and you have this compared to Hollywood celebrities saying things in 2016. The disparities. Why do people care? Like, why should I give a shit what some Hollywood celebrities think, when I should give more of a shit about what the actual people running, the actual people voting, like what they think.
Yeah, if you were to compare, if we're like making a pros and cons list of each party, ideally you would have, for the pros, you would have the best things of that party, and the cons, the worst things of that party. And when you have one side accurately determining, okay, here are the worst things that this party has done, and the things that you're listing are things like Hollywood celebrities doing an annoying video or whatever it may be. And then you ask them, wait, well, the worst things that the Republicans have done is things like steal the election. Isn't that a bigger issue than these annoying Hollywood celebrities that are being condescending, or these college students that are being condescending? The problem is that they don't know about something like the fake elector plot. Every single person who supports Trump that I've spoken with, that I've asked about the fake elector plot, have no idea what I'm talking about. But if you were to ask them, did Donald Trump steal the election? They roll their eyes and they say, no, obviously not. That's just a lie that's made up by the mainstream media. Just look at what occurred on January 6th, where the media was constantly lying about the fact that it was actually the police officers that opened up the doors for people to start walking in. Like, they don't actually know what the arguments against their side are. And so that's why it feels really discombobulating when you're reading this article and he's listing all these terrible things, or allegedly these terrible things that the Democrats are doing. And even if he were to be 100% correct, let's for the sake of the argument say that he's correct in his analysis of the Democrats. It's still not as bad as what the Republicans have done, but he doesn't know that. And that's the problem. And this is going to go into a topic towards that I kind of want to bring up later, is that I made a video about why I no longer consider myself anti-woke. Not that my views have changed, but just that the anti-woke community, they have come across as the most uninformed group of people that I've ever witnessed. They don't know about any of the bad stuff that the Republicans did, because they kind of just created their own personal echo chamber, where they refuse to engage with people who are outside of that echo chamber, and they'll just make accusations like, oh, I don't want to have this person on my podcast because he's a douchebag. Look at what he said over here. And it's like, that's the same exact thing that we were all complaining about in 2016 about the people on the left, that they don't want to invite anyone who disagrees with them because they don't like the type of person that they are. You're doing the same exact thing. The only difference is that now it's levied against you. And so that's the big issue here, right? Is that all of these things, he could be correct about everything that he's saying so far, and I still wouldn't care, because none of this is anywhere even remotely close to what the other side is doing. And again, that's not me defending the Democrats so much as it is just chastising the Republicans for everything that they did, stealing the election, making fake elector slates, even the Fox Dominion lawsuit, the media sphere itself. There's just no comparison on the other side. But if you don't know the crazy stuff that the Republicans are doing, well, then almost by definition, the bad stuff that the other side is doing is going to seem like the worst thing in the world to you. Anyway, so let's look into what finally took him off the fence about Donald Trump.
All right.
As a Brit, the day-to-day of American politics doesn't affect me as much as it does people. But there is one thing that does: safety. An excellent video showed a translator explaining how Trump handled a Taliban leader. He showed the extremist aerial photos of his own home and explained that if a single U.S. soldier were harmed, that home and the family therein would perish. I watched another video of Trump castigating the Germans for continuing to do business with Putin, despite a NATO agreement not to. I've now seen evidence of countless ways the left has outright and shamelessly lied about Trump and twisted his words.
Okay, so I want to jump in here. This guy seems to be appreciating. How he talked about in a specific video how he would handle a Taliban leader, right? But let's look at what. So this is how he's talking. This is how he's supposed to come off. But let's look at what he's actually done, right? He went to negotiate directly with the Taliban while the Taliban was still, not the actual official government. They excluded the official government of Afghanistan, and they practically handed Afghanistan on a silver platter to the Taliban, right? And same thing with Ukraine. He keeps on talking about how he wants to cede this territory to end the war, right? Peace. Like part of the whole reason of America was founded, right? Give me liberty or give me death, right? It's about that. Like sometimes war is just when you're trying to defend against a tyrannical force that's much stronger, that could actually supplant all those sort of like liberal values that created the country. So I don't care about him looking tough in a certain video saying like, oh, I'm going to blow up your family.
Yeah. And these are and also so far he's listed two things, right? I kind of want to, like, macroscopically looking at this article, he hasn't, I was going to say technically, I don't even need to say technically. He has not made an argument against Kamala Harris. He hasn't. And he's barely made an argument in defense of Donald Trump. He's listed, I think, literally a couple of things, those two things, right?
Yeah, it's just he's funny and he looks tough on video.
Okay, three things, yeah.
He watched two videos. Sorry, he watched two videos.
Yeah, he watched two videos. And this is, how many words are we
This swayed his view. He watched two videos and this swayed his view. Right? Like it's like his how politically uninformed you have to be. Maybe he's not politically informed. Maybe he's just ideologically captured. But you're either ideologically captured or you're politically uninformed when it takes two videos and these two specific videos to actually entirely sway your position. Especially when you don't actually know about things like the Doha Accords, in which Trump. I'm going to say it again. Trump gave Afghanistan to the Taliban.
Mm-hmm. But maybe we're wrong. Let's see. Maybe he gives off more reasons later on. So it continues and says, my last 2 weeks of podcasting in the States have been a revelation. I've met so many intelligent and friendly people who find the left racist and anti-liberal. I went to Joe Rogan's comedy club, The Mothership, accused so often of right-wing comedy for bigots, despite being the audience seemed to enjoy the wit and intelligence of the three black comedians. And again, he keeps going on and on with this talking point about Joe Rogan and company all being called, and I just don't care. This doesn't matter to me. Again, I want to reiterate, because I do think it's crucial, that sure, there are people out there like that do exist, but these people hold no political capital in any way whatsoever. They don't hold any offices in government. To the extent that they're an issue is that they might be an issue within the sociology departments on universities, which I will be the first person to criticize. Again, I got a degree in religious studies. I got a degree in philosophy. I know how the sociology departments are. I don't like the direction that they're going in. I do think that they basically have an epistemological echo chamber, but they don't hold any governmental power whatsoever. They don't have any political capital. Whereas on the Republican side, you have someone like Josh Shriver going against gay marriage. You have someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene literally believing in conspiracy theories that the Democrats are controlling the weather so that way they can use hurricanes to destroy Florida because they're trying to attack a certain voting bloc. These are actual people within government that have a red tie on that are lawmakers. There is no equivalent to this on the Democratic Party. The people that he's complaining about are not numerous. They don't vote. They don't have political capital, and their social capital is very clearly diminishing. Very clearly diminishing. There are more people complaining about wokeness in society than there are people complaining about racism and bigotry in society. So I just don't, like, this doesn't matter to me. My answer to this, if he were to say, all these people are getting called is just grow up. Anyways, shall we go on, or would you like something else to say?
I guess there's a few things I wanted to add. So as you were saying, so right now it does seem like he seems to be like, I guess personally when he says, I've met so many intelligent and friendly people who find the left racist and anti-liberal, right? What it seems to be saying is that he's like, oh, I get to go meet these people and like we can like circle jerk together about how much we hate the other side. Right, and that seems to be like the argument that he's making, right? Like I would pick on something else if there was something else, but there isn't really much substance in this article, and it just seems to be that like, oh, let's all jerk off about how we hate the same people.
And he's also doing the same thing that he's complaining about, right? He's complaining that these people are calling him a racist, and he doesn't like that. But then he just said, I've met so many intelligent friends who find the left racist and anti-liberal. It's like, all right, so you have two sides calling each other names. Why don't we focus on the arguments rather than complaining about one side calling the other side names, but being okay with the name calling on your side?
Yeah. Also, it's like these people are the ones that always cry about free speech, and it's like the only thing he's complained about the left for is the left exercising its free speech to call you a name online.
All right, so he goes on and says, the space for a right is a stark contrast to the closed-minded authoritarianism of my own country, the UK. I've concluded that individual liberty makes for a tiny blip, an anomaly, on the map of our past, and that we might need a strong man, however disagreeable you might find him, in charge of the most important position of the free world. Like humor, disagreeability is an antidote to authoritarian rule. These are just buzzwords. These are Jordan Peterson buzzwords. This conversation
also the irony is that like to what authoritarian rule? Like right now, Trump probably fulfills like the actual criteria for authoritarian rule, like more so than the woke left that he's making these accusations against and against Kamala.
Yeah, being basically making the argument that you should have been allowed to steal the election because it resides within your core constitutional powers to do so. Or sorry, let me be accurate. I don't want to. I want to be accurate. Making the argument that certain evidence shouldn't be presented in court because it's not up for judicial review, because those things are part of the core constitutional powers of the president of the United States, things that the president can do that shouldn't be up for judicial review, because otherwise you would have the executive branch being lower than the judicial branch. I mean, that to me sounds authoritarian. Basically saying that...
And this was just introduced. It's important to recognize that this argument, right, is only based off of a ruling that was introduced within Trump's presidency. Right, the judges, the Trump versus Trump, or no, it wasn't during Trump's presidency. It was during Biden's presidency, I think. But it was the Supreme Court that Trump essentially appointed, the Trump versus USA 2024, where they actually ruled and actually created this explicit category of criminal immunity for the presidency, which is just a completely bizarre like category. I very, very highly doubt that the U.S. during the revolution would have wanted another king, would have wanted someone who was actually above the law. I'm pretty sure every president would have imagined that they are actually subject to the law, especially or even within their presidential powers, right? You can't just use your presidential powers to commit a particular crime and expect it to not be investigated or not not be obstructed with.
Yeah, I made what might be the greatest post of all time, if I do say so myself, on Bluesky about how George Washington would have hated Donald Trump, and he absolutely would have. There's no doubt about it. Everyone go check out that post. It's my favorite post. It went a little viral. So anyways, he goes on to say, this conversation between Bill Maher and Megyn Kelly also played a role in my conversion. And it says, with Bill Maher saying, what did and the Japanese have in common? Nothing, except they saw the world in the same way. Fascism. If your guy gets in, we're going to be on the wrong side of this one. And Megyn Kelly responds, if my guy gets in, I think we'll go back to the time that we had when he was president, which is the only time we didn't start a war or get involved in a war. And then he says, I'm usually on the side with Bill Maher, but I can't help but see his rhetoric's employment of thought-terminating cliche. As a Scientologist simply shouts suppressive person at a non-believer, or a Muslim or blue-haired woke idiot screams Islamophobe, it has become customary for those with so-called Trump derangement syndrome to resort to fascist without explaining why. But the problem is that the other side, they do explain why he's a fascist or why he uses fascist language. They do explain why. You can disagree with their reasonings, but they do explain why. For example, when he says that he wants to suspend the Constitution because he thinks the election was stolen, that is fascistic behavior. That's the way, in his level of speech is what you would expect a fascist to say. So this just leads me to believe, again, that he's not listening to what the other side is saying, or he does, but he doesn't care about actually steel manning them. He wants to straw man them as much as possible. And then he goes on to say, this has come up in almost every conversation about Trump with British friends. Everybody is scared that he'll become a dictator, even though he left willingly, albeit begrudgingly, when he lost. The problem...
Wait. It's not albeit begrudgingly. It was not albeit begrudgingly. It's not like he left off muttering like, oh, well, I'll win next time. He pre-declared victory, right? And then when he got off, he did the whole electors plot and then riled up the January 6th crowd to intimidate the people who are counting the votes, because again, either he believed, right, or he was at least trying to convince everyone else that he actually still won the elections. And then after January 6th, 4 years later, right, even to this day, there was that I think it was on NBC, right? He had this interview, and it was a pretty softball interview towards him, right? They have to be pretty soft because they can't really ask him any hard hitting questions, otherwise, he's not gonna want to come on. But one of the questions they did ask was, okay, well now that you've won this new election and stuff, will you go back and say that in 2020 you lost the election? And he said no. He refused to acknowledge that he actually lost that election. He's still upholding to this day that he won that election, right? And even in I think even actual voters, there was some poll that showed about like 80% of Republicans like still believe that the elections in 2020 were rigged and that Trump actually won those elections.
And if Trump had actually won that election, and Joe Biden was the one making the argument that the election was stolen, and to this day he continues to stoke the flames of this conspiracy theory that the election was stolen, every single Andrew Gold and every other single anti-woke person would point to this as an example of how insane the Democratic Party has become. They refuse to adhere to the peaceful transfer of power. The Democrats are constantly just passing on this conspiracy theory that he stole the election and going against every American norm that we have in this country. They absolutely would say this. But they sane wash everything that Donald Trump does. If the Republicans and what Donald Trump did, if the Democrats actually did what the Republicans did, then everyone would lose their minds. Ben Shapiro would lose his mind at how insane it is that Joe Biden hired fake people to pose as fake elector slates. It would be the end of the world to them. But because it's Donald Trump that did it, they'll either say, yeah, it sucks that he did it, but whatever, he's not going to be able to do it again. Here's a tweet that actually demonstrates this, by the way. Here's a tweet, by the way. So you guys know that I'm not making this up. Someone actually saying that, yes, Donald Trump did try to steal the election, but the powers that be kept him in check. So it's not like he'll be able to do it again. So I'm still voting for him. If the Democrats did this, it would be the end of the world. But because Donald Trump and the Republicans did this, they sanewash it and say it's not that big of a deal, while amplifying the fact that Kamala Harris said something about, yeah, maybe people who were born, trans women maybe should probably still compete with biological women. It's like, there's no comparison to these two. Another hilarious, I wish he was here because I want to pick his brain about this, because he says, we stand on the cusp of World War III just a few years later. Kamala is tweeting about getting free marijuana for black people. I mean, the World War III part, I'm guessing he wants to capitulate to Putin and just give Ukraine to Russia, is what I'm guessing, so that way we avoid World War III, even though it's a pretty big deal that you have a country trying to annex sovereign land. So
I think like conceding and letting Russia take Ukraine, like that just sets horrible precedent, because it might be the first time since the end of World War II that we actually allowed like an internationally recognized land to be invaded, and we like fully capitulated to them. Right. And if that happens, right, then what do other countries think? Other countries think, oh, well, like, I guess we can just invade, and when other countries start to threaten us, we can just say like, okay, well, stop. But as long as we get to keep what we've taken so far, right? What stops Russia from going even further and further? Someone might say, oh, well, we'll make it so that next time is a real time. We'll give Russia consequences. Why not this time? We already made that deal and they broke it. They're pushing forward, right? Especially after we convinced Ukraine to give up their nukes. We convinced Ukraine to end their nuclear program, right? In exchange for protection, right? So they gave up their nukes, and now we let them get in, we let them get invaded. What does that tell other countries about denuclearizing? Now no other country is going to actually trust to denuclearize, right? If anything, in the future that's going to get more countries to want to renuclearize. That also tells other countries, like, China can be like, oh, I guess I can go grab Taiwan now. It's not like anyone's going to stop me. And especially with the U.S., going a very isolationist route, this pretty much gives Russia and China like a great like a really good opportunity to go and become the new world powers. Right, America's world hegemony seems like it's going to come to an end, and Russia and China will be able to fill that vacuum that gets left behind when it knows that the U.S., which originally tried to stand as the world's police, actually just doesn't honor its deals in protection. Right, and for example, some of the aid that we're sending Ukraine are just old weapons and stuff that we wouldn't have used anyways, because we have higher standards for our own weapons. So we send them old weapons, and people are losing their minds over billions being sent to Ukraine, thinking that it could be spent elsewhere.
And I'm confident that if he were here listening to you, he would not have a response. He can listen to this video and come up with a response, but I'm confident, based on what he's saying here in this article and some of the tweets that I've seen him put out, he would not have a response to that, because he just doesn't. When your entire identity is built around culture war politics and built around these sorts of trivial. I shouldn't say trivial. A lot of these things do matter; they are important, but in the grand scheme of things, they're not as important as things that are going in terms of policy and things that are going in terms of, I guess the economy or whatever. I don't know. When your entire identity is just built around the culture war, and those are the only types of things that you can speak on, and not only that, but all of your culture war topics and all of your culture war knowledge seems to have stagnated past 2017, and you're just kind of left within in this stasis chamber, then you're not really going to have a response to a lot of arguments that are updated. So yeah, and the article kind of ends there. He just ends it off by saying, time was the left was the place for free speech and equality advocates. Today, it is a racist, authoritarian fashion for ideologues who castrate children. I don't pretend to know how individual Americans should vote, but I do feel that, whatever. He has not made an argument against the Democrats or against Kamala Harris, and actually hasn't really, I would argue, hasn't really made an argument against leftism, because he's not substantiating anything. He's using buzzwords. He's using culture war talking points that you can just hear Jordan Peterson or his friend Constantine, spew, and he's repeating them. But if someone's reading this from the outside who isn't in the culture war bubble or who is aware of the culture war but hasn't really picked a side and is well informed, he's going to be reading this and think to himself, there is nothing in here at all. He doesn't give an argument against the Democrats. He doesn't even give an argument against leftism necessarily. And he certainly doesn't give a very good defense of the Republicans or Donald Trump. There's so much information. There's so much context that is left out of this article that renders it useless. As I said at the beginning, if I come off as condescending or whatever it may be, I apologize. That's not how I choose to come across as. But that I honestly believe that that's just the best way to describe this. The best way to describe this is that there's a lot of context missing. It's very uninformed. It's very echo chamber coded. The only people who are going to be reading this and applauding it are the people who have already decided that Donald Trump is their person, and that the people that they hate are the people on the other side of the aisle. And so it's worthless, this article. I have very few good things to say about it because it's just I think it's emblematic of the bigger problem in this country, in which you have half the people in this country convinced that the Democratic Party is this group of woke scolds that are trying to ruin this country. But a lot of the factual claims that they have are just not true, right? And again, it's not an opinion to say that the Democrats did try to pass legislation on immigration. It's a fact. It's not an opinion that sanctuary cities have nothing to do with immigration in terms of the way it's actually implemented. That's just a fact. That's not an opinion. And that's a problem. And people such as Andrew Gold, people in the anti-woke community, are guilty of this to such a greater degree, I would argue, than the left was guilty of this in 2016. Because here, unlike 2016, here, now these people are actually in power. These people have the power to enforce policy. They control the House, they control the Senate, and they'll control the presidency pretty soon. They can do what they want with much less pushback from the other side. Any closing comments, Mr. Rebound?
Yeah, I guess there's a few things I want to mention. So, like, in reading this, I mean, since we read it before, I knew nothing was coming. But in the first time reading this, I was really hoping, each time he was mentioning these things, that these were just sort of like, the fluff until he gets to, something substantive, right? But in reading this whole thing, it doesn't really come off like something like, I mean, I know you said that you respect this guy and stuff, and maybe he has other work that shows that he actually does have like a thought process and goes through certain things, but like at least from this article, it sounds like it's something that could have been written by just some random guy off the street who isn't really like that in-depth politics, and who sort of just gets their political opinions from like their Twitter feed that they scroll through like occasionally, right? It just comes off, it's so uninformed about any sort of policy. Again, it was a few videos that he saw that really like jibed with him. He saw Trump was funny. He saw Trump was like powerful and authoritative towards that Taliban member, and those swayed him above the actual policies that he might agree with.
I guess we'll see what happens the next 4 years. We'll have more conversational episodes such as this one. So anyways, with that, I'll leave you guys. I hope everyone has a great day, and Mr. Rebound, I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful